Well, life for Dutch farmers in the Netherlands has only gotten worse since our last report a few weeks ago. The government-imposed nitrogen standards have made it impossible, virtually impossible, to continue farming. 17,000 farmers at risk of being shut down, run out of business. Many farmers forced to sell their lands, destroy their livestock. The situation has only gotten worse since our last report, and the mainstream media is completely ignoring this story. I mean, it is really difficult to find any information in the mainstream media about this story. Ralph Schoellhammer is an academic researcher. He's been studying this story very closely from the very beginning, and Ralph joins us again on the show to talk about it. Ralph, welcome back to the show.
Well, Clayton, thank you so much for having me again.
Absolutely. And, the impetus for this was hearing from a viewer last night who wrote me this and said, can you guys give more attention to what's happening to the Dutch farmers? The government is still going to force to buy their properties despite all of the protests. And this viewer said a 43-year-old farmer had taken his life because it's just gotten so bad and didn't see any other way out of it. So it seems like it's gotten much worse, Ralph.
Yeah, it's continued to grind on. You are one of the few outlets that reports about this. There's a couple of people in the Netherlands who report about it. There's a New Zealand network that reports about it because the situation, just as a quick footnote, is also getting worse for farmers in New Zealand. But the bureaucracy grinds on. It is in one sense almost remarkable that regardless of what the people say or regardless what the public sentiment is, they just move forward, right? And it's just starting to begin getting more and more this emergency measure character, which makes it even harder to formulate or to organize resistance. So this is really going to be a tough couple of months and coming up for the Dutch farmers, because as you correctly point out, it doesn't look like it's going to stop.
So we saw the numbers, and maybe we can get into some of the specifics here. So if we can refresh our viewers' memories on this, very strict nitrogen rules, forcing farmers to cull their livestock. We saw the map. We featured the map here on the show, which showed that a lot of farmers that live near more urban settings, if their farms kind of butted up against cities, it was a much stricter culling of livestock, killing of their livestock to reduce those nitrogen numbers near population centers, right? So, and we heard from farmers we featured here on the show that have said, look, of course they want to take our land because they want to build apartment complexes. They want to build shopping centers. That's the reason the numbers for these farmers in these more urban areas is worse off than it is for those who are far more rural. Can you talk a little bit about the specifics of which farms are affected by this?
Well, it's a combination of both, right? I think you correctly pointed out. For some, it is about the expansion of urban planning. There is this vision, if you want, to create this almost cross-border state with the Netherlands, with Belgium, with parts of Germany, kind of have this huge urban center that would include up to about between 50 and 150 million people. So kind of there's a significant city planning element to it, but it combines itself with another element that we have been talking about before, which is kind of the environmental fanaticism that is also behind it. So the Dutch farmers, in a sense, are being squeezed from two sides. So on the one hand, you have these plans for urban expansion. And on the other hand, you have this idea that modern farming can be done with very limited input, right? Particularly when we talk about nitrogen, less fertilizer, that you can feed people who should eat less meat anyways, right? So it's of course okay to reduce livestock. And this is, without getting off topic, this is not just a phenomenon that's happening in the Netherlands. You have almost, again, under the exclusion of any reporting, a similar development in Germany, where the idea is that by 2030, about 30% of all farming products should come from organic agriculture. And just as an example, what this would do to German farming would mean Germany would become from being independent in its food production, they would become a net grain importer. So after we had this great experience of how well it works to outsource your energy to Russia, apparently we are now trying in Europe to do the same thing with our food supply. Because if we cannot produce enough at home, be it the Netherlands, be it Germany or other countries where farmers are under similar pressure, well, where are you going to get the food from? Well, either people eat less, which I guess is one part of the plan, or you have to import it from somewhere.
Right. And that's exactly what's happening. And it seems draconian. We're seeing some pushback. We covered last night on the show in the UK, Liz Truss, whose popularity has plummeted, but it seems there is this movement, some awareness there about, hey, we can't just have our entire country covered in solar farms. We need to actually get back to farming again. We need food. We can't, instead of having solar farms, let's remove some of these solar farms and let's actually start to harvest this land. Let's start to sow. Start to raise livestock and actually move away from the rewilding movement of the UK. So you're seeing at least some awareness of this in the UK, but there doesn't seem to be this awareness about it in the Netherlands. Estimated 11,000 farms will have to close, 17,000 farmers to reduce their livestock. It seems like they are winning and the farmers are losing. Am I wrong about that?
Well, at the moment, it looks like it. I mean, the political representation of the farmers, as far as I can tell from the most recent polls, is still pretty strong. So this, again, it's not necessarily getting stronger, but it's still about 20 times what it was a couple of years back. So I think if there would be elections in the Netherlands, this would be a massive topic. And I think those who are on the side of the farmers would actually gain significant numbers of seats within the Dutch parliament. The problem is, and I'm glad you mentioned also the UK, a problem is that to some extent, even, let's say, more right-wing or conservative movements do sympathize with this idea that we can return to a, less technologically advanced form of agriculture, that the idea of organic farming does have some appeal also in among those who otherwise, I think, would share our view of this whole thing. And we see this in another area, which is this idea, as we also say, that farming is kind of this which it does, right? It introduces these virtues and it's a lifestyle and all very important things. But I think we also have to be very concrete about this and saying, yes, but it's modern farming, right? It's farming as a consequence of the agricultural revolution. And just one quick point, I think that people tend to forget this. What would be the consequences if we would turn our backs on the Dutch farmers, on the German farmers, on the New Zealand farmers? Well, all these very rich countries then would have to buy a significant part of their food on the global market. But who then can no longer afford to buy food? All the poor countries. So This is not just about how we would like to eat and about having potential food shortages in Europe, which I don't think we would have, because we are still, for now, rich enough then to just buy on the global market. But if you live in Pakistan, if you live in Egypt, where the population has to use a significant percentage of their income, we're talking about 30 to 40% of their income, they need to buy food. Like if prices there change by 10, 15, 20%, people will not be able to afford this. So this is not just morally wrong. This could also be the beginning of a humanitarian catastrophe outside of Europe. So I think there are many things that speak for supporting the farmers, supporting more agricultural output and not less agricultural output.
Oh, I'm so glad that you bring that up, because very often, of course, it's Africa. It is definitely these poorer countries that get slammed first. We see it. We absolutely have seen it during the Russian sanctions, and we're seeing this spill over now. And it all seems, of course, part of this larger Great Reset. It seems like it's all part of a larger unelected body of individuals who are driving these stories. Have we been able to connect that thread between Germany, New Zealand, and the Netherlands? That it's not just the Netherlands and their cabinet and approving $25 billion for this reduction of nitrogen in the Netherlands, but it comes from this larger umbrella group of people who is driving this narrative.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it also happens in Canada. It happens partially in the US. The US are a little better off because I think their farmers are better organized. And I mean this in a positive way. The agricultural lobby strikes me as much stronger in the United States than in other parts of the world. But you, of course, are absolutely correct. There is a general top-down approach to make farming, to make the production of food more difficult. And you see then small issues as well. We talked about this before, right? Kind of that, well, maybe we can switch to, insect-based food. Or another thing that you have, I think there's one city, and I think you reported on this as well, there's one city in the Netherlands that now banned all commercials for meat, right? So McDonald's can no longer put up a billboard saying, try our Big Mac or something. So there is something afoot. This is not a conspiracy theory. I mean, you can see it with your own eyes. The question, of course, is what can the people do? Because this is driven largely and very often by an unelected bureaucracy. So even if you vote the government out, this thing is probably going to grind on. So it's very, very difficult to do something about it.
You know, it's so frustrating. And we have, our viewers who say we watch the show, we want to make a change. We want to be part of the solution. We don't want to just be outraged about it. So these farmers, the reason we're doing this story is to try to educate people, to get out and vote, to try to push these leaders out who are, creating these problems. What do you think is next for the Dutch farmers specifically? Where do you think they go from here?
Well, as far as I can tell, they will continue to protest. But my message to those who want to support them or who find ways to argue for them, I think the key thing to keep in mind is almost everything over the last decades that was driven by that somewhat anonymous bureaucracy, whether it was interest rate policy, which now leads to high inflation, whether it was migration, which is leading to huge problems, and now it's the same thing with the agriculture. They've not delivered what they promised that they're gonna deliver. Again, whether it's good intended and just badly executed, I think that's a discussion we can have separately. But I think it is absolutely accurate to say we have no reason to trust these people. Right? Again, whatever their intentions are, separate debate for me. But simply, these are people who so far have not made life easier. And even if we look at the numbers, right? If somebody says we have to do this for the environment, we have to do this for climate reasons. If you look at the numbers, agriculture and energy use in Europe has been declining. And what I mean by this is we have gotten more and more and more efficient year on year. So it's just a matter of time until we will get even better at this. It's really the time frame. And that, I think, tells you that it's more an ideological / quasi-religious approach to say, oh, this needs to be done by 2030. This needs to be done by 2035. No, it doesn't. It could also, if it's 2040 or 2050, that's also fine, and the Dutch farmers can do it. The German farmers can do it, but you need to give them the appropriate time. So to be very clear, what I'm trying to say is these farmers, all of them, are absolutely aware of the needs to take care of the environment. They are, for God's sake, farmers. It is very absurd that people who have never had, a shovel in their hand or never had a pitchfork in their hand is telling those who is for generations how they are supposed to treat the environment. They know how to do it, and they know what the limits are.
Right. And think about this. This struck me too. You think about the $25 billion that the cabinet put aside for this program to reduce these nitrogen emissions. And that's their $25 billion. Imagine if they had helped the farmers, in using that $25 billion to help modernize some of the agriculture instead of driving them out of business. It just seems ridiculous. They could have used this money in a much more helpful way to help these farmers.
Just because you made such a fantastic point, now just let me add on something to this, because this is once again not just happening in this particular sector, right? Germany has now announced that they are going to use 200 billion euros, that's about 5% of German GDP, to soften the potential fallout from the energy crisis. I mean, can you imagine how much, whether it's nuclear power or fracking or what else, what you could have done with 200 billion euros? But it's always the same. So they make mistakes because they pursue an ideological agenda. And then they kind of, again, with one hand, they put it in our pocket to finance then the fallout and the blowback from the policies that they have pushed for themselves. And I think agriculture will be the same story, exactly as you said. Give the money to those who know what to do with it, and they will come up with solutions.
That's right. Ralph, continue to stay on this story. We will continue to have you on here covering this. I think it's one of the most important stories of our time. So thank you so much for your research. Thank you for everything that you do on this story. We really appreciate it.
Anytime, Clay. Anytime.
And our thanks to Ralph. Always a great thinker on this space and deep research on this. So our thanks to Ralph.